What up, YouTube? It's me, Johnny, back at it again with another video. And it's been a while since I've done a character breakdown style video. So today, I want to do one around the rumored villains that are said to show up in the Batman Part 2. Now, I know this movie release date isn't, set until October of 2025. And some of, if not all of the ones that I actually talk about today in this video may not even show up in the movie. But even if that is the case, it'll still give you some basic background knowledge into each one of these characters. With that said, though, before I dive into this, if you're enjoying the content you're listening to here, please, for me, like the video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell so that way anytime a new video comes out, you will be alerted. Plus, it helps the almighty YouTube algorithm push my content to new listeners. Also, if you want additional content from me around a wide range of topics, check out my podcast anywhere podcasts are being played nowadays by searching for the same name as the YouTube page. But without further ado, let me dive into this. So, from what we have heard rumored, there are four villains that are said to be a part of the Batman Part 2, and they are Clayface, Professor Prague, Scarecrow, and Hush. So let's talk about Clayface first, since he is one of the OG Batman villains. His character was created by Bill Finger and Bob Kane back in 1940. He first actually appeared in the Detective Comics number 40. Fun fact, by the way, that's what Batman comics were called before they, later changed it to Batman. But the character of Clayface was played by several different people, nine to be exact, and each one of them had a different origin story. Originally, though, his character was based on an actor that was driven mad because he caught wind of a remake happening with a horror film that he had starred in called Dread Castle. And he didn't like the fact that, he didn't actually get a call from the studio to reprise his role. So, like any insane person, he decides that the best way to get back at the crew and the cast members were to actually start, killing them because that's a rational thing to do. And he started picking them off one by one. And he did it with the most clever bad guy name ever in Clayface, which just so happened to be the name of the character he played in the original movie. I mean, truly a level 200 IQ thinking right there, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, the version of him that we got later and is his most recognizable version was the Matt Hagen iteration, which saw him appear in Detective Comics number 298, I believe. And that comic came out in 1961 or somewhere around that time. This version of him, instead of being a disgruntled, washed up actor who went off the deep end, he was a treasure hunter that stumbled across a radioactive pool of photoplasma while out, on an excursion that, unfortunately for him anyway, turned him into the shape-shifting monster that we see today. His powers allow him to shape shift into pretty much anything, and he was able to create just about any melee weapon that he could actually, use to fight with. Before I move on actually to the next villain, though, I want to actually give a shout out to the version of Clayface that we actually saw in Batman the Animated Series, one of, if not the best comic book related cartoon series of all time, that Batman animated series. With that said, though, in this show, Matt Hagen was still the person who turned into Clayface, but like I mentioned earlier, this one became Clayface, though, due to him being disfigured because of a car accident. He was then approached by a crooked businessman named Ronald Daggett, who convinced him to be, this test dummy for Renew You, a chemical compound that, basically that it was, in hopes that his appearance would improve. Well, that didn't happen, of course, and he was transformed into that version that we saw in the animated series called Clayface. Now that we got Clayface out of the way, let me actually move on to the next rumored villain that is said to appear, and that will be Professor Prague, and it may be, I think it's Prague. My apologies if I'm butchering that for longtime Batman comic people out there. My apologies if I'm butchering that, but I believe it's Professor Prague. Anyway, though, ladies and gentlemen, if you are a DC comic book fan, you already know about this guy, but I'm going to try and give the cleanest version of him that I can say because in DC Comics, he is a complete lunatic. His character matches the dark theme that DC Comics have, which is actually a good thing, so kudos to Grant Morrison for creating him. Lazo Valentine, aka Professor Prag, is a deranged surgeon that is a devout believer in Pygmalion, so much so that he goes around Gotham kidnapping citizens and turning them into his docile doldrums who do his bidding. He made his first appearance in DC Comics in Batman issue number 666. Wow. That dropped in July of 2007. He doesn't have any superpowers, but he is an extremely gifted surgeon and he uses those skills to create his doldrums soldiers. When he first appeared, though, he was a gangster and didn't don the iconic mask that we actually see him wear now. And instead of surgery, he used chemicals to torture and brainwash people into becoming his doldrum. Needless to say, this guy is the perfect DC level dark villain that will guarantee that this movie has to be rated R unless they just want to dial back his character, and I actually hope they don't do that. Just make the movie rated R. I mean, we've seen it done before. Deadpool pulled it off, so clearly it can be done. But let's move on to the next rumored DC villain, and that would be I guess I could say a fan favorite with people who follow DC in Hush. His real name in comics is Dr. Thomas Elliot, who also goes by Tommy, and his character was first introduced back in January 2023 in Batman number 609. Before becoming a criminal, he was a childhood friend of Bruce Wayne back when he and Bruce's parents were still alive anyway. For any fans of this character that might have read the comics, you probably already know, but in case you know you're listening and you don't know Tommy and Bruce's characters in DC Comics, they're actually supposed to be the same person, but just a polar opposite at the same time. Anything from a morale standpoint that Bruce had, Tommy didn't. For example, Bruce loved his parents, while Tommy, like any good psychopath, wanted to kill his parents to get their wealth. Now, before anybody who actually knows his backstory gets on to me in the comments, yes, I know that Tommy's father, though wealthy, was an abusive prick, to say the least, and one could argue that maybe Tommy ended up the way he did due to this, and of course his mother actually caring more about the money and things versus her own son, which is again more just traumatic stuff. That said, though, he still came up with an idea to kill his parents, which he did. However, his mother actually, ended up living due to Bruce's father's emergency surgery that he did. So Tommy got no money from this and had to wait years until his mother died in order for him to, finally get the wealth he so badly wanted. And during that time, he blamed Bruce and his father for it. By the time Bruce's parents had already, of course, died, Bruce was living what Tommy saw, as the life he wanted, to live all those years and drove himself mad during the years of, Bruce's upbringing and being a orphan child with money, and he actually sought out to kill Bruce Wayne and ruin his perceived good fortune. Now, Hush doesn't have any powers, but he is extremely intelligent. One could call him an expert physician due to his surgical expertise. He's also a strategist, he's a marksman, and he has way above average human strength due to his conditioning. Hush has a host of appearances in Batman comics since his debut, and I would say, some of the best stories in Batman comics, at least in the recent years, like the Heart of Hush story and Batman number 846 through, I believe that was 850, for example. If he is in the movie, even though his character in the comics anyway has this obsession with Bruce Wayne and taking his money, I hope they actually don't harp on that aspect of his character too much. Now, to the last rumored Batman villain and someone that Hush in comics actually teamed up with a few times to try to take down the Dark Knight, the Scarecrow. Dr. Jonathan Crane is his real comic book name. Man, Batman sure had a lot of villains that were doctors. But anyway, back to the point. He was introduced in World's Finest Comics number 3 in September of 1941, created by Bill Finger and Bob Kane. Now, his method of terrorizing the good people of Gotham was through various drugs, his fear gas being the most famous one that he produced, and allowed him to play on the fears and phobias of people. Unlike a lot of other Batman villains, Scarecrow really didn't do any of this just for, simple money grabs or even power, but instead, he actually did it for the sole purpose to satisfy his own crazy desires and as a sort of case study on the unfortunate souls that would be affected by his different, torture methods. For as popular as he is when he was first created in Batman or Detective Comics, he really wasn't seen all that much. It really wasn't until I would say sometime around in the 1960s, and then more commonly in the 1980s, after the Crisis on Infinite Earths, storyline that, by the way, that's probably one of the best DC comic book, stories written, in my opinion. Once that story happened, and that kind of was a, a reboot story arc that happened in DC, and then we kind of saw him a little bit more. This really helped his character actually start to develop. Like, for example, since his name is the Scarecrow, but unlike how scarecrows in real life scares away birds, his character in DC Comics was actually afraid of birds. Pretty ironic. Even though that was a consistent thing for his character throughout the Batman comics, he still managed to get past it for his crow that he actually named Nightmare. Oh, also, fun fact, I thought that this character was actually based either on a, scarecrow, the ones we see out in the field, or maybe even the one from the Wizard of Oz. But nope, he was actually inspired by a character in a book called The Legend of Sleepy Hollow that was originally written all the way back in 1820. Hey, don't judge me. I really thought that's what that was. I know I'm not the only one out there that thought that. But anyway, as far as his powers go, he's your typical Batman villain. Doesn't really have any superpowers per se. He does have like toxic immunity though, due to him consistently being exposed to his own gases. And if I remember correctly, he was also able to transform due to him getting genetic modifications done to him by Fright, who is another villain that Batman matches up with from time to time. Scarecrow is also pretty prolific in a few martial arts forms as well, and is a master manipulator, I would say, since he actually has a degree in psychology. So, yeah, he's not a pushover villain by any stretch. There hasn't been any plot leaks about the movie so far, so we don't really know how many of these villains will actually play a role in Batman Part 2 outside of, just the rumors. There hasn't been any plot or anything like that released or nothing about the actual story. But my early guess is that if they are all in that movie, that there may actually join forces to try to take down the Dark Knight. So they might form a group that's actually famous in DC Comics called the Injustice League. Now, I know that none of these, villains that I just talked about were in the original creation of that villainous team, that formed back in October of 1947. However, I believe they're going to go this way. But hey, let me know what you believe in the comments. Do you think they are going to utilize these villains the way I mentioned, putting them into that Injustice style team? Or do you even think we're going to see them at all? Nevertheless, until next time, you all have a good one, and I'll talk to you in the next video. Take care.